Thank you, Chair. All protocols observed. On behalf of the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism of the Committee on World Food Security, we'd like to express our appreciation for this event, jointly convened by the CFS with the President of the UN General Assembly as an explicit recognition and sign of support of the UN General Assembly to the important role of the CFS. This is the third food price crisis in 15 years. Failure to deal with the structural causes of the crises in 2008 and 2011 means we are once again facing the unacceptable situation of millions more people being pushed into hunger. Each crisis exposes not only the inability of the agro-industrial food system to respond to successive crises, but also that it has contributed to creating them. Countries that suffer from debt and dependency on food imports are particularly affected, leaving them with no means to cope. The Rome-based agencies, G7, and financial institutions, however, frame the current global food crisis almost exclusively from a market and production perspective, and as caused by the disruption of global trade due to a war involving two major agro-exporting countries. They fail to question why so many countries in the global south have become dependent on imports, or why we continue to face unacceptable levels of hunger despite many years of record production in previous years. As with past food crises, governments with the economic power to effect structural reforms to the global economy are not effectively acting towards the needed profound transformation because of their unwillingness to address the root causes of a failing system and leaving our communities with the burden to adjust to successive crises. The dominant economic actors take partial measures and use political spaces they control, such as the G7, Bretton Woods institutions, WTO, to impose their responses, further increasing inequalities within and across countries, particularly marginalizing populations and countries while with fragile national policy spaces and fragmenting multilateral spaces. Their responses are biased because they are not based on a human rights approach. There is no meaningful participation of the most marginalized and affected constituencies to shape the responses through their autonomous formations and organizations. They are not proposing any policy or normative changes for a vision of profound food systems transformation to address the multiple and intertwined crises of the present and the future, and working towards economic and social justice, food sovereignty, gender justice and diversity, agroecology, biodiversity, and climate justice. They do not address the challenges faced by Indigenous peoples and mobile pastoralists whose traditional food systems provide critical food security for millions of Indigenous people and beyond, where dominant corporate actors and interests often act in disruptive ways, ignoring rights of Indigenous peoples. They do not address the challenges faced by small-scale food producers and workers who are the backbone of local, national, and territorially embedded food systems and responsible for most of the food consumed in the world. And finally, they do not take into account and build on relevant policy outcomes of the CFS. They fail to draw lessons on why the responses to the previous global food price crises were inadequate to prevent recurring crises. Instead, they continue to reinforce large-scale industrial food production and a food security strategy based on dependence on global trade, synthetic fertilizers, and fossil fuels to access a handful of cereal crops. Thank you.